I want to give you a personal anecdote, Mark. About 15 years ago, I was on an assignment called the Polar Safari. It was a 2-week snowmobile trek in Nunavut, and it was very interesting. There was somebody from France. I knew I was going to hate this guy from the get-go. He had a photograph of George Bush with the universal nose slash through it, and we had an Inuit guide, and he started this white liberal virtue signaling by saying, wasn't it great before the white men came here? I mean, you did everything so organic. You didn't have snowmobiles, spouting carbon emissions. You didn't have guns. And the guy looked at him. This is the Inuit, and like he was mad. He said, "Well, listen. In my great-grandfather's day, it took a dog team 2 weeks to travel what I can do in 1 hour with a snowmobile, and hunting polar bears with spears, it actually meant a life and death situation if you didn't hit the target properly, whereas with a gun, you have a much greater chance of actually bagging the prey." It was just astonishing to see this virtue signaler from France put in his place by somebody whose quality of life has been immeasurably increased in a matter of, even in terms of life and death, Mark, thanks to our technology.
Yes. In fact, I did a documentary years ago on the Amazon, and I interviewed the author of the book called The Myth of the Noble Eco-Savage, because typically American liberals and the Western liberals have this vision of native indigenous peoples at one in harmony with nature, would never harm it. In the book, they detail that back, if you go over, for instance, tropical forests in the 1500s or earlier, you could see massive areas of the forest burning. Indigenous peoples could be just as destructive, just as environmentally unfriendly or unsustainable. They would hunt animals to extinction. They would run them off a cliff. They just didn't have the technology that later people had. But to deify them in some way and put them up on a pedestal is not accurate, as your anecdote tells. And even the indigenous people themselves don't want that label, because that's not a real label. It's a myth of history. But that's the way the white liberals particularly, and I'm using the word white here because the other story we were going to talk about is this story about people not having kids because of, quote, white privilege and fear of the climate catastrophe. It's all the same thing. Somehow our generation, our modern era, we've destroyed the earth, so therefore we can't allow ourselves to have kids. We need to save it. And they have a whole whopping 400 plus people signed on to not have kids right now, which is a small number, but I would expect that to grow. There's enough nuts out there that might believe this climate rhetoric.
Oh, and it is so nutty, Mark. And I mean, yes, you're referring to the story, activists go on birth strike over climate change, and it quotes somebody, a founder of a British climate change activism group, Blythe Pepino. What gets me is like the audacity that she would come out and say, I'm going to save the planet by not having a child. And the idea that a media outlet thinks this is worthy to actually do a story. This is just a woman doing what millions of other women, by their own choice, are not doing, i.e. bringing children to the world. But what gets me is that when this Blythe, Mark, she says, here's one of her quotes, "I'm lucky enough to have a certain amount of power in this world. I'm white and privileged and don't have any children." Why do they always have to bring race into this, Mark? I mean, I think there's another narrative, another agenda at play here, don't you?
Yeah, in fact, recently at Climate Depot in the past month, I've literally been collecting stories on race, on class, on the social system. We have a whole series of studies now being funded on how Hispanics have bigger carbon footprints than blacks and whites have the highest carbon footprint, and this diet affects that. And, and I even go back to the 19th century that showed the Aborigines said the change in climate was due to the introduction of the white man to the country in Australia. I mean, the race has always been part of our culture. It's no surprise that they're going to now label it and paste it and start dealing with it in climate.
That's an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a video monologue and then I interview an interesting guest, and then I end by reading my hate mail. But you've got to subscribe to it, which you can do at therebel.media/shows.